Welcome to our new Humaculture Perspective series. We're excited to explore ways organizations can help people achieve meaningful behavior changes, moving toward more optimal behavior to help people and the organization thrive. But first, let's introduce ourselves. Many of you may know us from previous webinars or from working with us. Wes and I have been working with Colin and Hanlie for a few years now, and we are so glad to welcome them as our guests on this new series. Colin is a fellow actuary, lives in London, England, and is an avid bicyclist. Colin brings a decidedly analytical approach to his work with Virtuosa team and its research arm, Brat Lab, and has been instrumental in developing an approach for behavior change firmly rooted in science.
Yeah, and we've come to know Hanlie as the part of the team that makes all of this great Brat Lab research very relatable. Hanlie's a behavior change expert and system strategist, and she applies behavior change strategies to some of the most really challenging behavioral problems. Hanlie grew up in South Africa.
Thanks for those introductions, Steve, Wes, and indeed for asking us to share our work and our approach. I've come to appreciate Steve as a colleague who's really passionate about achieving optimal behavior, and unusually for an actuary in this space has conducted research in that area.
Yes, I echo Colin's comments, and for me, Wes is one of those people that just has the ability to bring things to life from the humaculture perspective. It's really great how he's able to apply that research quite naturally into everyday life.
Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please use the Q&A rather than the chat so we're able to see them. We know your time is valuable, so why don't we just get started? Let's think about behavior change and its application in the 7 dimensions of humaculture.
Sure. Okay. Well, every dimension has an impact on all the others, and that's the idea behind humaculture. So the dimensions provide a better way to understand organizations, and they also help us make decisions about an organization or a business in a much more holistic and effective way. So while many organizations may, for example, focus on the people dimension, which is one of our 7 dimensions, with pay, benefits, wellness programs, or in some other ways, it's really difficult to achieve organizational success, or especially sustainable success, without fully understanding the influence each of the other dimensions has on the people dimension. So horticulturists rely on the expertise in each dimension that helps them with their overall approach, and really so must organizational leaders. And that expertise is most effectively incorporated when organizational leaders take a truly 7-dimensional view.
How is that?
Well, optimal behavior in all areas of life is obviously important. And anybody that's worked with traditional human resources or human capital roles will recognize the frustrating truth that it is very, very hard for most people to make the best choices. And those with wellness or well-being program responsibilities, for example, that they're trying to get people to stop smoking or get enough exercise, even though those people really want to do those things, they find it really, really hard to get them to actually do that. So this is the same really in all aspects of behavior change.
I agree. Few organizations achieve much success at this because the focus is limited to merely providing incentives or tools, coaching, and some clever smartphone apps, etc. Organizational leaders really need to broaden their perspective, take a 7-dimensional approach. For example, the organization itself has a tremendous impact on behavior, as we'll discuss today and in our series.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it. And so today we want to really explore what an organization can do to naturally influence people to behave optimally and do so consistently. That's why we've asked Colin and Hanlie to join us. So Colin, tell us what your thoughts are on how an organization can really lead people to develop optimal behaviors that are enduring.
Well, that's actually what our work at Brat Lab and Virtuosa team is all about. We've learned that people behave in ways that reflect the context in which they live their daily lives. Moreover, they respond to those contexts according to forces or powers that act upon each of us. Organizations will only be able to influence meaningful, lasting, optimal behaviors when they understand the influences that apply within these contexts and then adjust the powers to use them more effectively. So, Hanlie, why don't we talk a little bit about why achieving optimal behavior seems to be so hard?
Well, one of the things, Colin, is that people are mostly unaware of these influences at play in their daily lives until it's pointed out. Or perhaps they're aware, but they simply underestimate just how much these influences really impact their choices and ultimately their routines and their habits.
That's interesting. While working with one organization, the CHRO of an internationally renowned university and academic medical center with the vision of becoming the city of health, liked to tell a story. One of their departments had a tradition of doing a fundraiser sponsored by Dunkin' Donuts that now violated their new city of health policy. With the new policy, they needed to get approval. The CHRO asked the department lead, would you envision that a convent would raise money by opening a brothel?
Yeah. Great example, Steve. What you can hear here is two influences at play that are working in conflict with each other and trying to create the desired optimal behavior. And the optimal behavior here is obviously orientated around creating great health behaviors. The first is the desire to help create a healthy culture, as captured by the City of Health campaign. This is about inspiring motivation across a range of contexts. But the second, less obvious, but equally powerful in its influence, is the message that we partner with junk food organizations like Dunkin' Donuts. That second message can completely undermine the first. As people are trying to behave healthily, they'll find themselves distracted by the temptation of fattening donuts. So this is an example of a failure to anticipate temptations that will resist the change you're trying to make. And this is occurring in what we call the spaces context. The result is that people will find it hard to adopt those healthy behaviors that are proposed under the City of Health banner.
So most employers' well-intentioned efforts and initiatives fall short of the results they expect. They fail to understand what is really leading to the suboptimal behaviors they seek to achieve. But what is sometimes very perplexing is that the organization's efforts seem to achieve results for some people, but not for others.
Yeah, that seems very true. I've seen that a lot. People don't behave consistently, or they don't behave in the way that you thought they would. But why is that?
Well, I'd say every person or every organizational situation is unique. Believing that what changes one person or one organization in one set of circumstances will change for another is founded on wishful thinking practice, not science.
That's a great point. So why does one person respond favorably to efforts to change behavior and some do not? Hanlie and Colin, can you provide maybe a couple of examples on that?
I'd be happy to, Steve. In our research in Brat Lab, we discovered that there is never a one size fits all. And a great example of that is we worked with an NGO that was performing investigations to test the safety and efficacy of health service delivery organizations. And contrary to our typical approach in this organization, it was really important to have change agents or advocates for change on the ground, demonstrating the way the organization wanted them to behave. These change agents were leading the change by being the physical representation of the desired optimal behavior, making use of social contagion to get others to practice those behaviors as well.
And if you remember, it worked because the changes were focused on aligning around a purpose and a vision that it was natural for everybody to get behind. In another example, we worked with a mining company, quite a different situation where colleagues rarely met. When they did, they weren't necessarily demonstrating the behaviors that mattered and that we were trying to change. In this case, we had to think about making changes to the systems and to the culture to create influences that were at play when people couldn't see each other. If we tried to deploy the change agents at the mining company, it would probably not have been as effective at creating the desired optimal behavior.
Okay. So we've kind of looked at then why it's hard for people as individuals to make change and why some reasons why one person responds differently from another to the same sorts of efforts. But what is it about organizations? What are they missing in this process to really have successful behavior change in their groups?
We've found that organizations fail because their efforts to facilitate change do not recognize fully the complexities of humankind. Even today, there's widespread belief that if something is shown to be bad or unhealthy, the people who hear that news will stop that behavior. This is wildly oversimplified, frankly. The reality is that many people continue those behaviors even they know perfectly well they are not helpful and they're not healthy.
And I would say persistence of smoking across the world is a prime example of that. There's probably no one who smokes that doesn't know that smoking kills, or whatever warning message, right, has appeared on packages over the last several decades. And yet people will continue to smoke because they will tell themselves that it's not going to happen to them, or they're not going to be one of those people who's going to die early, or that they can control their smoking, even when it's affecting their families.
That's right. Stories are very powerful. And the stories that we tell ourselves in particular. Organizations are guilty of attempting to make change after change, but fail to create sustained new ways of doing things because they miss the breakdowns between the company's culture, systems, buildings, interactions, policies, and procedures, and so on, and the way they would like things to be and things to happen.
Yeah, which is a great observation, and one of the big reasons why Virtuosity team and the approach that they're taking is so well suited for the Humaculturist to employ. Each of the 7 dimensions, as we mentioned, has an impact on all the others, and this Virtuosity team approach and philosophy completely recognizes and employs that truth.
Great point, Wes. So how can organizations help people achieve meaningful, sustainable change?
We believe the key to driving optimal behavior is to understand the influences that act on people as experienced through the 4 powers model or forces, and the 4 contexts in which those powers operate. These forces and contexts in which they occur are largely invisible and unnoticed, and yet they are extremely powerful. There's great wisdom in the cliche question, do fish know they are wet? Water defines a fish's life, but they swim around blissfully unaware of the context that gives them life.
Yeah, exactly. And the lesson here is that the key is to intentionally create the conditions for change to happen more naturally and consistently. Change the shape of the water around you. Organizations must then understand and then use our formula for change, which
I think Colin froze up here.
He did. So maybe let me step in and finish. So I think he was talking about the different elements of the formula for change. Let's give him a minute.
Can you hear me? Am I back yet?
Oh, you're back. Go ahead, Colin. Yeah,
Okay.
Hanlie was going to try to guess what you were going to say next, but you go ahead.
The internet has just declared it's unstable, so apologies, listeners. It's the reality of
Technology.
Working in the real world. Am I coming through okay now?
Yes, you're fine. Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, so what I was saying is that the key for organizations is to intentionally create the conditions for change to happen more naturally and consistently. Organizations understand and use our formula for change, which we'll come on to later. You can rebalance the forces that are acting on people across the 4 contexts. So through this series that we're going to go through together, we want to share all these concepts with you and use them, show them how to use them in your organization to effect meaningful and lasting change. Understanding these concepts and employing them increases the likelihood of behavior change happening more naturally, or at least with less resistance.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Colin. And your comment about creating the conditions, clearly the first thing we need to do is create better internet conditions. But beyond that, that as a horticulturist, that's really what you do. You want to create the right conditions for the right plant at the right time, right climate, all those things. And that's the same, it sounds like it's true with people, because we're saying people respond to them uniquely in ways to the world around them. And so it's important to understand that, and that there is no one size fits all. So each person's going to respond uniquely. We need to understand those contexts. And I think this is a great way of thinking about this and moving forward.
So Hanlie, can you tell us more about the 4 contexts?
Of course. We'll talk quite a bit in depth in each of the following sessions about them in the webinar series, but let's define what a context is and describe its characteristics. A context, in the way that we define it, is broadly defined as a group of conditions that exist where and when something happens. Context refer to the internal and external environments in which life unfolds, including physical and virtual surroundings, the people you interact with, and the rules that govern those interactions. These contexts are essentially hidden in plain sight, all around us, but very difficult to identify, and yet very powerful in determining how we behave.
That's right. It's to understand how to influence behavior change, organizational leaders need to know that they exist, first of all, and then know that they influence us powerfully. I really want to drive that message home. We have defined 4 contexts in which we live our lives, and they're up on the screen now. The first is the systems context, which is the virtual environment, policies, procedures, rules, legislation, culture, all the things that guide us on our way. The next is a spaces context, which is the physical environment in which we work, we eat, we sleep, we breathe. It's about the walls that surround us and the signs that guide us. Next, there is the social context. This captures how we influence each other through words and deeds and the principles of social contagion. And finally, there is the context of the self, the complex and multifaceted nature of us as human beings and all the baggage that we bring along.
Yeah, in my work, I've learned that the organization is more influential on people aspects such as health than what the organization might attempt to do from, say, a well-being perspective. As many of you may have heard from my experience in working with a pilot loss of license plan through 9/11, where the rate of disability increased 5-fold, my key learning was that it was the fundamental change in the pilot's job and working conditions that led to the increased rate of disability.
Yeah, and I love that story, Steve, and it is true. But isn't there more to consider than just the context or the organization itself? It's true a cactus doesn't grow well in a swamp, but why is that? What is it about the cactus that is going to cause it to respond in that condition, that context, that it just simply won't work? Seems like we need to understand that about the people we're working with as well.
Yeah, I love the this swampy cactus image where I think it's a really great analogy. So within each context, if a change is to be made, we need to think about the forces that act on people and make appropriate adjustments to create a new balance. As we said about the 4 contexts, we're going to talk about each of the powers in more detail during the other webinars in this series. But appreciating that there are these 4 powers and understanding how to adapt them will help us create the change that we want. So Hanlie, do you actually want to give the listeners a quick rundown of what the 4 powers are?
Absolutely. So there are 4 powers at play in each of the contexts. The first is the power to grow capability, which involves helping people to have both competence and confidence to make the change. And the distinction is one is about learning, typically, and the other is about practicing. The next is the power to inspire motivation, which involves finding ways to create a lasting energy focused on desired change, because as you know, you need to continue to motivate yourself over a period of time when it comes to change and changing behavior specifically. Then there's overcoming barriers, knowing that barriers to change exist and they will emerge, and thinking through how to navigate them when they occur. And finally, the power to resist temptation, when there's that desire to revert back to old, comfortable ways of behaving. So behavior change should not rely entirely on willpower and wishful thinking, as you mentioned before. It's important to know that when things get difficult, there are tools to help. And these tools are based solidly and practically in science.
So the key to understand the four contexts and the four powers and the influence they have, and then how do we use them to influence behavior change?
Steve, I think it's probably best to illustrate it with an example. So let's begin with a simple illustration of how changing powers can help influence behavior change. Think of yourself standing in a boxing ring with 4 bungee ropes attached to each of the 4 corner posts. Think of those ropes as a representation, if you like, of the influence of the powers acting upon you in each context. To begin with, each of the bungee ropes is equally tight. You're in this kind of happy equilibrium. Making a change in behavior is analogous to moving within that ring. As you move towards a new way of behaving, you move towards one of the posts. So attention increases, trying to pull you back to where you were. Unless you adjust the length of those ropes or equivalently modify the influences that are acting on you, you're going to find it hard to make the change stick, which frankly is actually what happens to most of us as individuals or organizations as we try and make change in real life. We make the change, but after a while we find that the change is hard to sustain and we drift back and revert back to the old ways of behaving.
Okay, so basically, unless we change the conditions of the swamp in which the cactus is trying to grow, the cactus is going to fail. We've got to address that context. So it seems the same is true for the organization, is what we're saying.
Yeah, exactly. To influence change, it's important to look at a wide range of influences. This could be culture, policies, procedures, influences that are created in the physical space, storytelling about purpose and meaning, recognition, appreciation, social contagion. There's so many. And by the way, folks, we're going to come on to this in the rest of the webinar series. There's a lot to consider, and it can trip you up if you don't take the time to work through all the aspects of our change framework.
Thanks, Colin. That makes great sense. Hanlie, what is an example of how the changing context influences behavior change?
Steve, ever since starting this research with Colin about 10 years ago, over 10 years ago now, I've been fascinated by the influence that physical space has. I think it's a massively underrated context and can also be a real stumbling block towards achieving optimal behavior. One of the examples is an organization that we worked with that we turned what I call an office death trap into an inspiring performance space by adapting the seating, adapting the screens and partitions, allowing for standing desks, changing the lighting, reducing clutter, adding plant life, and also personal touches, all based in science. And no, I'm not advocating for open space offices, if anyone is wondering that, because they are very particular to certain industries and certain instances where they actually do function very, very well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know one client of mine wanted to encourage people to use stairs, so they slowed down the elevators so that people would take the stairs, and it worked quite well, and they were able to measure it. Well, I'm really looking forward to exploring all of this in much greater detail as we take a deeper dive into how to use each context as well as the 4 powers and move more effectively to support the desired behavior change. Wes, can you sum up for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So it seems obvious to me that we all know there are many behaviors we should probably be working to change. But we also know it is maddeningly hard to do that, to make that change, to really accomplish that. So at the organizational level, we need to think about these difficulties and the fact that people are going to respond differently based on their unique personalities, their unique characteristics. And that's going to give us the greatest effort as an organizational leader to help them make those changes for the better. So Colin and Hanlie, through the Virtuosa team's behavior change framework, bring us a very effective science-based approach to helping people make this meaningful, sustainable change. And understanding and applying these 4 contexts and the 4 powers should allow organizations to take a step closer to a truly 7-dimensional view and approach And I think this is going to be a really good series. So I'm looking forward to it as well in the upcoming webinar. So Steve, what does our remaining webinar schedule look like here?
Well, we got 5 more sessions as part of this series, and we'll go every other month on the 3rd Thursday of the month. We're going to cover the spaces context, the context of the self, the social context, the systems context, and then we'll wrap it all up and talk about how do you reap the fruits of the optimal behaviors through all that we've discussed over these 6 sessions. All right, so with that, we'll take a few questions. So how does changing one context shape the other context? Hanlie, do you want to take that?
Absolutely. So I think this is an important question because it illustrates how each of the contexts can overlap, as you would imagine, but also how changing in one can change something in another context. And one of the examples I used was the spaces, using spaces to begin to guide and nudge behaviors. So they all do play into each other, but it's also important to remember that this is organic. So it will change as the situations change, but you'll always have tools to adapt and be agile to those changes as they come along and make adjustments accordingly. And that's part of the power of it. It's not so static that it can't adjust with the situation that you find yourself in or how the environment adapts. So they very strongly correlated with each other. And we encourage you to work in all of the contexts, not necessarily at the same time, because that's a little bit too much, but to always have an awareness of how the others might react or how it might play out in a different context when you work in one or another.
Here's a question that I think might have a personal experience related to it. What behavior changes do you need to join meetings on time? Colin, do you want to take that?
Yeah, that does sound like it's come from painful personal experience, doesn't it? In all behavior change thinking, as we're alluding to, it's good to think through the context. So in this case, start with systems. It's probably the one that will have applied for most people joining this call. The calendar system is a system which will guide, the reminders, the prompts are designed to get you to the meeting on time. If it's not working for you, what else can you do inside that context in order to get the result? Then there's the spaces context. Could you, if you're making a commitment to get to meetings on time, you've struggled with it in the past, put a sign up somewhere close to your screen saying, I'm making a commitment to join meetings on time, keep an eye out for it. Social, think about maybe getting a commitment partner or saying to somebody who's going to be in a meeting, look, I'm making a commitment to join meetings on time. I'm trying to change my behaviors in this respect. Can you keep an eye on me and give me some feedback and just let me know whether I'm doing it or not from your perspective? And then there's the self context. The storytelling self is probably going, well, others are always late to meetings, so why should I be on time? That kind of story can be replaced by another story, which is that if I'm late, it's disrespectful to others, and I ought to be in meetings on time, even if they're not, because I can then set the example that others can follow, and they can, I'll be the leader for doing the right thing. So that you get the shape of the thinking that you can go through in order to do those things. Hopefully that helped whoever asked the question.
Yeah. I know we're out of time, but this is a good question that I think I'll take. What is the percentage impact that organizations can achieve in improved health metrics or reduce spending through efforts like these? I had one client. It was actually a health system, the largest health system in a state, and they had gone through acquisition and acquiring different health systems, and we were merging 10 different health systems together, and I had to assimilate their benefits and their contributions and also comply with healthcare reform, the ACA, their affordability and all the different rules associated with healthcare reform. And we designed this from a behavioral perspective, and they already had a great wellness program. They're getting like 50% or about 50% participation. But the way we designed this and communicated it and rolled it out, we were able to get to 98% participation in their health screenings that for all 5 metabolic measures, as well as nicotine. And we were able to get them to 75% risk-free of all the screenings that we did for them. And that actually reduced their costs by about $4.5 million. And 2.5 went to the employees, and 2 million went to, there was a $2 million reduction for the organization. And it was such a meaningful impact. And we were going off of a flat, this was actually a reduction in costs. And it was so meaningful that, and it impacted the organization so much, they had to restructure the health system because it really impacted the community and their community health. So with that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you find this helpful. We would love to hear from you, to learn more from you about your specific challenges or circumstances. Please remember to register for our next session in this series and complete the survey you will receive following the session. We really value your feedback, and we do listen to all responses and do incorporate that into our future sessions. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you on our next session. Bye-bye.